Hey, it's Drybear. And we need to talk about the Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree. Because if you didn't hear, there are some review bombings going on the DLC, and it's not for what you'd expect. See, Elden Ring 2 years ago won Game of the Year, and right now on Steam, at least for PC, it sits at between a 90 to 92% approval rating for the base game. But if we dive over to the DLC, it is sitting at a stout mixed, slowly rising, but sitting at around 58 to 62% approval rating. Now, normally when this happens on the launch of a game, it's usually because of performance issues. People have crashes, they can't run the game properly, lots of lag, and there is some of that going on. Some people are having performance issues in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC that they didn't have in the base game, but most of the negative reviews for the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC have nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the difficulty of the DLC. For example, the world and exploration is amazingly cool like in base game, but difficulty is way overtuned in not fun ways. I am not a Dark Souls player, fair enough, but I loved Elden Ring with various builds because I felt like I could just grind a bit and face bosses over leveled to allow mistakes. And this is something that is worth mentioning because there is a progression system in Shadow of the Erdtree that some people are missing, but there's still going to be negative reviews from people that understand how the Shadow Tree fragment system work and still don't like the difficulty of the new DLC. Or this one that says, I've just completed all the main remembrance bosses for Shadow of the Erdtree without summoning, so now I can get an informed opinion. The reason I give it a negative review is because the bosses are incredibly poorly executed and are simply a series of cheap tricks being spammed repeatedly that chunk your HP. They are not fun to fight whatsoever. I personally gained no satisfaction whatsoever from defeating any of them. Instead, only fleeting relief. These new bosses only serve to highlight the terminal main issue the game has. Now, they do bring up a good point about animation canceling, because one of the hallmark features of a true Souls game from FromSoft has been the locked animations. The idea that you have to find a window to swing your weapon, and usually once you start swinging, you're kind of locked into that animation, which means if you don't time it properly, you're going to get damaged or possibly perish. And this reviewer mentioned this a lot, the fact that if you can't animation cancel in the game, getting locked to those animations against a boss that attacks aggressively can cause a lot of pain and suffering. And this is actually something that came up a lot in Lies of P, a Souls-like that recently came out over the last year, where the enemies were hyper aggressive. So when you played a slow weapon build, you often got caught in these animations, were unable to escape, and were punished for playing basically what you thought was the way to play. Now, they also mentioned Bloodborne and Sekiro, which I wouldn't put exactly in the same category as the Dark Souls games and Elden Ring, because Bloodborne obviously had the gun parrying as well as transforming weapons and things like that, so a lot more flourish and fancy on top of the combat. And of course, Sekiro had tons of really good animation canceling, very easy parrying and insta-blocking and things like that, and ways to, stun and stagger enemies easily without having to trigger their stagger bar. You could do Makiri counter and things like that that would break up the combat and make it a little bit more manageable and also give you a little more agency in the fight. Here's another review that says that a lot of the old school fights were a little bit more peak Souls bosses, but you're getting a lot of fights inside of the DLC for Elden Ring that focus on long string combos. This is actually very true with bosses like R'Lana, which, by the way, I think R'Lana is one of the best fights in the DLC. I thoroughly enjoy facing her. She's really, really good, but she does have some like 9 or 10 hit combos that string together, where if you dodge one of them incorrectly, you're going to get hit by 1 or 2 more hits after that, and recovering becomes really difficult. So here's another negative review just from the fact that a lot of these bosses are incredibly aggressive with long combo chains. Here's another one that fully completed the DLC, has played a ton of hours on Elden Ring, and overall doesn't recommend the DLC. In fact, at the very end, you can see this reviewer gave it a 6 out of 10 and hopes to find that they clean up the really rough difficulty spikes in places and the disappointing ending that soured the experience. So things like the DLC has a separate scaling system from the main game, and maybe this was the flaw that they fell into, dealing with a % global scaler on characters. This can sometimes work really well, but sometimes also be really weird. It's almost like a catch-all net system that tries to get all people to function the same in a DLC, may have some builds or some playstyles or some break points in levels that just don't feel as good, or suddenly you're getting hit, you know, you have like 60, 70 vigor and you're getting hit for 80% of your health bar on a single hit, even though you think you're really tanky. That kind of system can definitely have its holes. It also probably isn't as well described in the DLC as it possibly could be. Reiterated by the fact in this review, the amount of damage bosses do is ridiculous. I went into the DLC at just level 140, which is probably below what is recommended, but even by the end of the DLC, when I was around 240-ish, I found all of the bosses would put me down to 1-hit territory after a single hit, which means that they were being 2-hit in their experience. And before anyone says level vigor, I ended up with 99 vigor and it made no difference at times, which is probably a good segue into reviewing the system that is actually in place right now. So obviously, when you go to your stats inside of the game, you have your normal stats outside of the DLC area, the Realm of Shadow. So vigor obviously gives you more HP, you can wear armor to get damage reduction, but you'll see on the right side of the screen for the stats, I have normal stats and then I have orange stats. So this is how the system works for anyone who doesn't know. You have this new Erdtree fragment and revered spirit ash system, which is a global nerf, a modifier nerf to your character as soon as you step foot into the Realm of Shadow. All of your stats get nuked down and you have to scale them back up percentage-wise by collecting the Erdtree fragments and the revered spirit ash for your summons and for torrent. And that's why when you walk up to a boss that you may not have enough fragments for, you get chunked for most of your HP, even though you may have good armor normally and good stats and a decent level, that percent scaler is overtaking whatever stats you may have on your character. So that's how the system works, and I think some people may not be fully buying into that and understanding it properly, but even once you do, I think there's a lot of scaling base inside of Shadow of the Erdtree that are making these bosses deal ridiculous damage and also be hyper aggressive at the same time. And personally, I agree with some of this sentiment, as there are some enemies like these red mages that felt like they were just aggressively annoying. There's definitely a fine line when you move between hard difficulty and annoying or sometimes obnoxious. This is something that we've been exploring over many decades through gaming, because very early on when we first started getting games, difficulty came from just scaling up HP and damage dealt. And that's kind of what we're getting right now with the Elden Ring Erdtree fragment Realm of Shadow scaling, because it's just a percentage scaler over everything. It's almost like an ARPG or an MMO when you go to a new zone and everything just outscales you, even though it is a skill-based game that's based on timing and reaction. So I think the question has to be asked, did the Erdtree fragment system have a positive effect on the DLC overall, or was it overscaled as part of their efforts to make the game more difficult and challenging for people that have been playing this game for a long time? 25 million copies sold for Elden Ring, billions of hours recorded in the game itself, and people are just so good and so prepared and so buff that going into the DLC, they didn't want anyone to steamroll through it, but it's possible that they just completely overdid it. So the question is, do you think that the mixed reviews on Steam are warranted? Is the DLC actually too hard, or is this a case of people just not giving it enough time, enough practice, enough preparation, or possibly in some cases just not collecting enough fragments to outscale the progression system of the DLC itself? Let me know what you think down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.